Counter-Narrative News wanted to bring you an interesting reflection on some political, social, cultural issues pertaining to the punk culture and community in Britain as it relates in its tensions and harmonies and discords and all the rest of it with racialized communities, particularly what's known as generally the politically black community or non-white or black and Asian communities in this country. So last year in December in 2022, Vivienne Westwood passed away. She was a pioneer of counterculture fashion and culture in the 1970s, which was overwhelmingly centered on young white English, mainly working class communities in the 70s, whose appetite and push for rebellion was really predicated on three things. One, their alienation from capitalist colonial Britain, which was in clear economic decline after the post-war boom, and in a country and culture that was still very grey and boring and traditional in that typically kind of weird, awkward English way. Two, the global space for rebellion had opened up primarily because of global rebellions and resistance led by the Vietnamese people against the French and then the US occupation, but also black resistance, including in the United States, led by the Black Panther Party, and victories culminating in and around 1975, especially for the Vietnamese, against US global hegemony, which represents really global Western culture as well. And three, as aforementioned by the Black Rebellion, especially but not solely in the USA, which was also itself radicalized by the Vietnamese communists, which we've explored in other episodes of the Black Panther Party on Counter-Narrative News. So Westwood teams up with this opportunistic businessman called Malcolm McLaren and opens up her clothes shops, initially called SEX, and then by the end of the 1970s was renamed called World's End. Westwood wanted to further radicalize and contribute to this youth rebellion in culture through her art and fashion design, and she did so quite effectively. These attempts were encapsulated by her Destroy t-shirt, which had a massive Nazi swastika on it and the word destroy, and also a fainter upside down Jesus Christ on a cross, and also a picture of Queen Elizabeth II. Clearly Westwood's design was arguing to destroy these things, as she explained her motivation more recently. Quote, "We hated the older generation, and it wasn't young people but old people we felt were responsible for the mismanagement and cruelty in the world still going on. To us, it was a way of saying to the older generation, we don't accept your values or your taboos," end of quote. The problem with the t-shirt is that in the punk scene and other related and overlapping cultural groups of rock culture, the symbol of Hitlerite Nazism were already evident. Peter Fonda in the 1966 film The Wild Angels wears a Nazi Iron Cross around his neck. The Hells Angels racist gang proudly displayed all kinds of Nazi symbols. The Rolling Stones on 5th of July 1969 at their Hyde Park concert had got the far-right Hells Angels gang to be their security. Into the 1970s, punk culture in England proudly displayed symbols of Nazism. Did they do this to shock the conservative oldies that they blamed for their alienation? Yes, but let's look into this social context a little bit more. As London in the 1970s was not a city only of grey and white people, London had the largest concentrations of black and brown working class people in the country. Areas like Southall, Peckham, Brixton, Whitechapel, Tottenham, Ladbroke Grove, Notting Hill and other large swathes of the city had high and visible concentrations of black and Asian working class communities. 1950s, 60s, 70s London, going into the 80s and even to the 1990s, was a difficult place for our communities to live because of overt, vicious and intense racism on all levels. Racist street attacks and racist murders were frequent. Open racist abuse by teachers in the education system, police, and other people in authority was just routine. Overt racism was the norm, and all the time on TV too. Black and brown people were largely excluded from access to cultural and musical activities that were open and welcoming to young white people. So Black and Asian communities constructed their own cultural spaces of reggae sound system culture and dances, blues parties, which was when black people organised their own dances, often in residential homes. Indians, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis organised their own quote-unquote welfare centres, where they also had their own concerts. And there was some cross-fertilisation between Asian and African heritage communities, particularly around reggae, ragga and the dub reggae scene. as beautifully illustrated by cultural events and communities in St. Paul's in Bristol, Handsworth in Birmingham, the Tudor Rose venue in Southall. And these communities were attacked by a lot of racist white people from all the new subcultures of teddy boys, skinheads, and punks. These white subcultures, however, arguably only came about because they saw black and Asian youth pioneer their own resistance, including culturally, which made a massive spectacle in the otherwise largely culturally dead and boring white England. Black and Asian communities' food was pungent. The dress and music was loud and proud, and from time to time, communities would raise up and smash up our oppressors in the police and white civilian racists. These communities opened up the space for rebellion globally and locally, and white people followed behind, but failed to address the central issues of racism that existed for everyone to see every day. In this context, the emerging punk movement just failed to give any understanding or respect to these social contexts and the experiences of their non-white neighbours. In their project to reject their parents' generation by use of the swastika, it should be reflected empathetically as to how black and brown communities may have felt about this. If we take the least problematic cultural product of Westwood's Destroy t-shirt from a few meters onwards, the t-shirt looks like a massive emblazoned Nazi symbol. Our parents and grandparents and young people who have some understanding of violent white supremacist racism that it represents were not made to feel more at ease by this. They would have felt at unease by this, and that's just unacceptable. The reality is that many other white punks would use racist iconography all over themselves. More recently, a few months ago, British rapper, a light-skinned black brother, Slow Tie, with the most anti-fascist of intentions, wore Westwood's Destroy t-shirt at a concert a few months back. But all anyone could see from the crowd was a big Nazi swastika leading Slow Tie to apologise and reiterate it was meant to be an anti-fascist message. On an ongoing controversy which is instructive to these issues is the Oi Punk concert on the 3rd of July 1981 in Southall. Southall through the 1960s, like other parts of London, became increasingly a town of racialised immigrants, in this case from Punjab, partitioned India. The new mainly Indian Punjabi arrivals faced racism on all levels, including by 1976 the racist murder of teenager Gurdeep Chuggar. The then Labour government backed a meeting of the far-right National Front at Southall Town Hall, and they instructed the police to conduct a vicious paramilitary operation on those resisting the racists by beating them and arresting hundreds and killing a local teacher on the protest, Blair Peach. Indian children in the 1970s in Southall also faced a horrific busing abuse, whereby the authorities would bus children out of the area as white racists thought that the sight of our children was sullying what their slowly disappearing middle-class white Southall represented. After all this, a bunch of punk bands decided to have a concert at the pub at the Hayes end of Southall High Street in July 1981. Local Asian youth and their friends launched an attack on the pub where the white skinheads were having their event and burnt the place down. July 1981 in Southall became a leading moment of black resistance in Britain, along with uprisings in Handsworth, Birmingham, Toxteth, Liverpool, St. Paul's, Bristol, Brixton and other places. To this day, we have punks defending the concert in Southall and basically blaming the local Asian community and totally ignoring and erasing all the context of what was taking place for decades in that community. This white racist arrogance and conceit reflects a large part, but not the entire part, of these white-dominated cultural scenes. Yes, there were a few black and Asian skinheads in the venue, as they were in that scene generally, but it was a scene that was totally and proactively ignorant of racism. It's like the old Asian or black person who joined Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon's English Defence League. Yes, there are a few non-white people in that milieu, but that social group is a racist white space and gives no respect to actual racist experiences and societal realities. Even what might appear to be a less racist space like the 1990s British indie scene or the USA-based grunge scene tended to be a white, culturally defined space, although by this point many black and brown people are delivering the scene, as in the case of the music band Corner Shop, Asian Dub Foundation, Fundamental, State of Bengal, albeit the last three are fusions of hip-hop, rap, reggae and rock and punk with sounds from the Indian subcontinent. And also in the case of grunge and related punk hardcore rock, the pioneers of Bad Brains from 1974, Kim Thayil of Soundgarden of South Indian heritage, Fishbone, 24/7 Spies, Chuck Mosley of Faith No More, Ray Ahn and Keish Da Silva of the Hard-Ons, and of course the trailblazing pioneer Zach De La Rocha of Rage Against the Machine, amongst many others. The Clash punk rock music band did perhaps more than most in the punk scene to explicitly address anti-racist challenges head-on, especially with the songs like Guns of Brixton and White Riot. And then Ladbroke Grove-based Dread activist and cultural figure Don Letts forms Big Audio Dynamite with Mick Jones, who was previously in The Clash as their guitarist. The Clash on their 1983 album cover feature an iconic scene of the Notting Hill uprising with Don Letts walking across a line of police. Interesting to note that Letts encouraged Bob Marley to look into the London punk scene, which inspires Bob Marley to make his song Punky Reggae Party, with the lyrics including the following: "It's a punky reggae party and it's tonight. It's a punky reggae party and it's all right. What did you say? Protected by society, treated with impunity, protected by my dignity. I search for reality, new wave, new craze, new wave, new phrase. I'm saying the Wailers will be there, the Damned, the Jam, the Clash, Maytales will be there, Dr. Feelgood too. Oh, no boring old farts, no boring old farts. We'll be there singing. A bubble, looking for no trouble. But if you trouble will give it to you double. Let me tell you, it takes a joyful sound to make the world go round." End of quote. However, because the white-dominated race on an either conceited level with oi punk skinheads or lazy racists in the case of indie and grunge, these white-dominated cultures were largely excluding black and brown youth. These youth just got on and made their own cultural movements that came to dominate the country and then the world in the form of jungle drum and bass, for example, and other genres. In hindsight, and with all the important principle that these spaces should have been always open to all youth of all backgrounds, and as such, things only became a bit more healthy in these dynamics if black and brown youth take a lead in these spaces. Black and brown youth historically have always welcomed the participation of their white counterparts in their cultural spaces, but this has not been a reciprocal relationship. The roots of punk and rock are also in black music and jazz, rhythm and blues, gospel and folk. MC5 were one of the first hard rock primitive punk bands who were closely associated with the Black Panther Party, which makes all this racist and conceit and ignorance all the more wrong and unethical. The instances of racism in alternative rock genres through the 1980s and 1990s are frequent and sometimes shocking, as in the example of Axl Rose's Guns N' Roses 1988 song, One in a Million, in which Roses mouths off against, quote, faggots, immigrants, N-words, and Muslims. In conclusion, it's clear in the case of Westwood's attempts at radicalizing the punk scene through her Destroy t-shirt was definitely well-intentioned. But in the absence of a concerted attempt at understanding and then navigating the leading role of racism, then mistakes will be made even by radical-minded people who try and attempt to contribute something to the struggle. Westwood herself went on a journey of becoming a celebrated figure of the establishment, from once being a figure of rebellion, and collected her Order of the British Empire from the Queen back in 1992. It's no surprise that she said then, quote, "What I learned from punk rock was that you don't change the establishment by attacking it," end of quote. Clearly she thinks, having become an establishment figure, she can effect some change. Well, whatever. Selling out to the cause is nothing new. John Lydon from the Sex Pistols has turned, like many of his generation of the punk scene, into a cliched gammon British nationalist. Mency from the Angelic Upstarts, who even fronted a documentary for anti-fascist action in the early 1990s, which one would recommend people watch, ends up being an openly sleazy racist in Thailand before his passing last year. None of this is to take away or to distort Westwood's good intentions in the 1970s and her contributions to fashion and culture. That aside but connected, the bottom line is that a community of people is either interested in understanding their place in society to fight oppressions from the system, including and centrally racism, or they are not. It's just as simple as that. To be able to understand and traverse these complexities means proactively and appropriately keeping your doors wide open to anti-racist thinking, action, and proactive inclusivity to black and brown youth, even for them to take a lead. And taking a lead from racialized communities amongst whom you will find those with understanding and experiences of the ongoing fight against racism and fascism. Many thanks.